Sean, are we ready to go online? Perfect. So calling the Wednesday, December 18th, 2024 Planning Commission meeting to order. Director Kromvik, can you do a roll call, please?
Yes, Duval,
Yeah.
Norwood, Peterson,
Here.
Stayingline,
Here.
Gorham, Grasula.
Here.
Excellent. All right. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Right, we are on to an oath of office for our newest member. James or
Nick.
Mr. Broyles, are you going to take care of that for us?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
What a privilege. I haven't done this. I used to do this in the military from time to time for some young soldiers, but Mr. Grasula, thanks for joining the Planning Commission. I'm glad you're on your feet. Please raise your right hand and just repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Justin Grasula,
Do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Minnesota,
the Constitution of the State of Minnesota,
and I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of the Planning Commission
and I will faithfully discharge the duties of the Office of Planning Commission
of the City of Brainerd, Minnesota,
of the City of Brainerd, Minnesota,
to the best of my judgment and ability, so help me God.
to the best of my judgment and abilities, so help me God.
Welcome aboard. Pleasure to have you.
Congratulations, Justin, and welcome aboard. Our next item on the agenda is I'm looking for a motion for approval of the agenda, please.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All right, Gorham, second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. We're on to approval of the minutes of the January 20th, 2024 meeting. Looking for a motion?
So moved.
All right, we have Stengline. Will we give you the second as?
Can I second it?
You may.
All right.
All right.
I'm happy now.
All right, motion and second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed, same sign. Perfect. We are on to unfinished business. Consider proposed building design standards ordinance. James, could you kick that off for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Planning Commission has been working on this for the last few months here, rewriting design standards ordinance, looking at lot sizes, lot widths, looking at garage setbacks and so forth. So everything that we've been doing has been included in the memo. Did want to note that staff has included the standing seam metal roof requirements for single-family homes that was discussed at the last meeting, and then also changed the requirements for accessory structures under 200 square feet. Also wanted to note that in the TN1 district, there's a typo. The max lot size should be 10,500 square feet and not 1,500 square feet, so staff will make that change before it goes to City Council. With that, staff recommends to conduct the public hearing and recommends approval of the proposed ordinance.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? Seeing none?
Just a
Yes,
quick question.
please.
If we received any feedback prior to the meeting by any chance, any feedback from anybody?
Not direct feedback from the public. I have heard, when I do talk to people about potential changes, they certainly are interested in what we're doing here. So somebody might come in for an accessory dwelling unit. I'll let them know what we're working on right now. People have come in for, potential garages and where that could be potentially located. We did change that the garage is no longer required. So as people come in and they're working through things, I do let them know what the Planning Commission is working on, and they certainly have been interested in having some of the regulations changed, and that's kind of what I've heard.
Terrific, thank you.
Any other questions before we move to public hearing?
Chair?
Yes,
I do.
Mr.
And
Peterson.
it'd probably be more for James, is, like, a few of these items, well, for example, permit duplex dwelling on the zoning or permit accessory dwelling units on rental property. So anything that is already started, you could actually go back and do this new.
Yeah, if anything was started, you could go back essentially and, if it's permitted or something like that. If there's a land use permit, certainly you have to work through that process. But Anything prior to any changes, if you've already submitted your building permit, you're exempt from any new things that are added into here. But certainly if something's advantageous, it's in the works, you could resubmit plans into the building department and have something changed. Obviously, so we'll have 2 council readings still has to go through as well as publication, so you're still looking for, probably about a month before it actually goes into effect.
Other questions? All right, with that, we're going to open the public hearing at 6:05. And this is the opportunity for folks to be able to address the proposed ordinance and bringing comments to the attention of the commission. If you do wish to speak on this topic, please come up to the podium, state your name and your address, and direct comments to me as the chair. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on this topic? And Sean, anybody online? It looks pretty bare out there. Okay. Ask a second time. Anyone wish to speak on the ordinance proposed for this evening? And last time, and seeing none, bring this back to the commission for discussion. Is there discussion on the ordinance? Yes, Mr. Rasula.
So I just wanted to point out section 5, just traditional neighborhood 1 density and lot dimensions. The maximum square footage for a lot, there are some lots in North Brainerd that don't have an alley behind them, so they're 150 feet deep. So I'm just wondering if that should be increased to 11,250 square feet before it requires a conditional use permit?
So most properties are going to be in that 50 to 150 range. So you're looking at, even if it does extend into the alley, you're still below that 10,000 square foot number. You're in that 7,500 to 8,000 square foot number. So this is, the number that we went to is essentially a property and a half. Certainly could be slightly increased if that's something that the commission would like.
Yeah, because most of our lots are 140 feet deep with alley in the middle. But there's some in North Brainerd specifically that are 150 feet deep without an alley. That was my comment and concern on it.
So what number were you proposing there?
11,250, which would be 150 feet deep by 75 feet.
Okay. Yeah, that's something that the commission could definitely discuss, and I don't think it would impact, it still wouldn't make 2 properties be able to be consolidated, which is, I think, is what we're looking at, not just being allowed by a permitted use. So I think that number would certainly would be fine as well.
And thanks for that, Justin. The implications of that are that if you happen to be one of these 11,250s, you were a legal nonconformity moving forward. Does that impact your ability to utilize other aspects of the building code?
It does not.
It does not encumber your ability to get a permit to make improvements. It doesn't encumber your ability to do accessory buildings and those sorts of things?
Nope, you still have to abide by all of your setback standards.
Okay. But we would technically be creating some number of legal nonconformities with 10,500.
Yep.
Is what the issue is here, right? Okay, thank you. Other discussion on the proposed ordinance?
Hear that? I think it makes perfect sense that Justin brought up, to be honest with you. Kind of eliminates some of those gray areas or problems that don't need to arise.
We put a bit of effort into trying to get rid of all the nonconformities when we revise the ordinance, so it'd be a shame to start putting them back in, knitting them back into the fabric.
Yeah,
Exactly right.
fresh set of eyes.
Yep, exactly. Anything else? So,
Yeah.
yes, James, please.
And I think what Justin probably saw is that we do now allow 75 feet for a frontage. So if that area is extending all the way back to the alley, that way they could fully utilize that 75-foot frontage and then have that. So I think, yeah, that'd be a good change.
Anything else? So then I think we have heard a proposed change to the TN1 maximum lot size to 11,250, is the number correct?
Correct.
So we have that, and I would take that as a recommendation from our commissioners. Are there any other changes that folks see? Seeing body language kind of saying no, then I would be looking for a motion to approve the ordinance with the change to the maximum lot size for TN1 from 10,500 to 11,250.
Second.
And there is a second. Okay, is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed, same sign. That goes forward. James, what's the next steps on and you could do it like I'm a Bill on Capitol Hill, you can sing it to us, or you could just tell us what the next steps are.
Yeah, so the next steps, I'm going to pull up the calendar here. This will be heard at the January 6th, and then I believe the 21st, because the 20th, I believe, is a holiday. So 2 council meetings, and then it'll be published, if approved by council, on the 25th, and then you're looking at 1 more week of, it has to be published for 1 week before it go into effect. So you're looking at probably the very beginning of February.
Very good. Thank you. So we're moving on now to new business. New business, item A is consider a variance for fence height requirement at 303 J Street Northeast. James, can you set that up for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's been a long history with this fence. 6-foot fences in the TN1 district must be lined up with the facade, and corner properties have 2 facades. The property owners built a 6-foot fence in October of 2022 out to the property line on that side corner yard, so it was beyond that facade, which is required by the zoning code. Staff did try to work with them throughout the summer of 2023. Property owners did reach out to several council members, planning commission members. I know a few of them looked at it to see if they could get the ordinance changed. No council members or commission members were interested in bringing that up on their own. At that time, the property owners were not interested in changing, so staff did begin citing the property owners for the fence that was out of compliance. This fall, after the property owners received their assessments on some of those fines, did end up moving the fence to its current location this fall with no permit. The fence is about 60 inches beyond the facade, which is not allowed by ordinance. Staff did have conversations with the property owner to make them aware that it's still out of compliance. So essentially they are applying for the variance to extend 59.5 inches beyond the facade of the house. So with that, variances may be granted when the applicant for the variance established that there are practical difficulties in complying with the zoning ordinance. One of the big ones is the location of the existing sidewalk would make it difficult to place the fence in line with the facade, and that's why the applicants had placed it as they had indicated to me. Due to the walkway that's pictured in the aerial map, Sean can pull that up on the findings of facts. An alternate fence location would make access much more difficult to the backyard, if not impossible. The location has nothing to do with economic considerations, which is another requirement of variances. This was an existing walkway that was not installed by the homeowner. And the staff does, when you take a look at this from an aerial perspective, the fence does not abut a neighboring property owner and does not extend to the alley, so there's really no impact on neighboring properties or public rights of ways. So with that, staff does recommend approval of the variance request. The applicants indicated they would not be able to attend tonight, but they did send an email in giving some of their thoughts, and I can certainly answer any questions that the Planning Commission has.
Thank you, Mr. Kronvik. Any questions for the director? Yes, Don.
The sidewalk you're referring to, is this a public sidewalk or their own sidewalk from the street to the house?
It's their own sidewalk that leads from the house there to the garage.
And is there no way that a door could be placed in the fence?
Not really. You can see how the angle goes right there. So if it were to go from the facade, it would just kind of oddly angle into that fence area.
Okay, so, and then what, they went straight across? Which way did they go with the fence?
So they went just outside, just outside of that area right there.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And then straight across,
And then straight across and then back to the
and
garage.
then returns to the garage.
Yep.
Okay. Other questions of staff? All right, with that, we're going to open the public hearing on the variance at 6:15. If there's anyone that wishes to speak on this subject, you may come forward and to the podium here, speak into the microphone, give us your name and address, and direct the comments and questions to the chair. Is there anyone here to speak on this item? Is there anyone here to speak on this item? Sean, I'm going to look at you for online traffic. All right, one more time. Anyone here to speak? With that, I'm going to close the public hearing at 6:15 and return this back to the commission. So discussion.
Any problem with it?
Mr. Gorham?
Chair, I'm a little troubled by the fact that they knew there was an issue with the fence, and they went ahead without even trying to cooperate with the city and just went ahead and moved the fence. So I just don't see a whole lot of cooperation with the property owner right now with the city. I'm not inclined to vote in favor of this.
Okay, are there other comments? If this were a legal nonconformity, we would have a discussion probably about minimizing the nonconformity when we're considering a variance. So in a hypothetical example, this is not a legal nonconformity. This is a fence that's not been placed consistent with the ordinance. So just to be clear, this is not a nonconformity. This is a violation. But in the concept of minimizing the nonconformity, you may look at this and say, well, the approach to the gate, and Sean, could we have the picture, please, again? Thank you. So the gate provides the access, and then from that point, the sidewalk then angles towards the garage, further and further away from the fence, further and further away from the street. So conceivably, you could extend that fence line out, say 10 feet, is it just a random number, and then say at that point it has to return to the line that's consistent with the facade. So you got a bump out there so they don't have to bust up a sidewalk and do a whole bunch of work to be able to make the fence work. So there's some room to be able to make some recommendations here that would kind of accommodate the fact that you're trying to address their perceived hardship. Hardship's not the word here. The term is
Practical difficulties.
practical difficulty that they say is the sidewalk. To help them address that sidewalk practical difficulty, you could allow that fence to be 5 feet beyond the facade for a length of some distance, and then it has to return. So I would say that there's some options here. And another option would be to allow this to stand as is, and questions are, does it meet the criteria for a variance? Other comments?
Chair?
Yes, Mr. Peterson.
Might be for James again, is what is the original intent of this ordinance by being equal with the front facade or whatever? Because we're talking two different buildings here, of course, that they're running into.
So this would be, this is a side corner facade. I think the biggest intent of the ordinance is not covering the house. So you know, as you're driving down, you want to be able to see houses. You want fences to be kind of consistent with the fronts of houses. So, you know, say this doesn't abut an alley, but you're abutting a house over there. You kind of want this fence line of 6 feet to be consistent with the other property owner. So I'd say that's probably the biggest intent of the ordinance is, you know, having to do with facades of houses.
Cosmetic.
Yep.
Other questions? Otherwise, I'm looking to hear a motion on the variance request.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the variance.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign? Aye. So that motion does not pass. So, anyone care to offer a different motion? Hearing none, then that recommendation from the council is that the variance not be approved.
Mr. Chair, do we need to give reasons why on this?
It would be, yeah, it would be prudent on reasons why it doesn't meet the requirements for a variance.
Thank you. So findings of fact that we have heard. They are in the packet, quite frankly, right? That it still does not fall within line with the facade. Are there other?
And a fact for me would be that, again, that they went ahead and constructed the fence even though they knew they were just going to be causing trouble. We're going to have trouble here. And so that, to me, I just am not that sympathetic. I think if you work with city staff will work with you, and we can find solutions.
I don't know that we can put that in our reason,
Well, then
so I think Joe might not like it. I don't see a practical difficulty. They just put it in the wrong place. They could start the fence in a different location. If they had come earlier, we could have worked out like Mike said, that it's gonna run maybe at an angle for a while, or so that it's alongside the sidewalk. I don't think it meets the requirements. James, is that enough?
Potentially, and I could work with the city attorney on that as well.
Okay.
Certainly these are recommendations by the planning commission. City council, if they choose to deny it, would have to come up with a resolution with the findings that I would have Joe review.
It's always good to have them, though, for council members.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes,
The
Mr. Peterson.
pictures of that fence is older than 2 years old. That is up there. That is not a 2-year-old fence.
they moved the fence.
We were able to see that it was, we witnessed it being put up. That's when we sent the letter in that fall of 2022. It might be a little grayer because there's clouds, it's winter time. But we're able to see, certainly when it's a treated fence, when a new fence is put up. So
Okay.
when we witness them putting it up.
And we've never had they've never told us that it was older than we think it is, right?
No, it was, and I don't believe they used old panels either. When we first witnessed it in 2022, it was new treated wood and it was green, but hasn't been stained. Certainly, kind of a grayish picture, so that's why it might look a little older.
Hard to get that in conforming without much.
All right, with that, we're moving on to item 8B, review proposed crypto mining ordinance. James, can you take us on that journey, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So City Council has directed the Planning Commission and staff to work on a crypto mining ordinance. Staff is looking at it as a data center, which would include multiple uses, crypto mining, AI centers, cloud storage, and such. So staff has drafted a preliminary ordinance for data centers that regulate the location, noise, hazardous waste, screening, and duration. Before having the public speak, staff did want to note, so I included a lot of items in here. These maybe aren't all things that I'm going to recommend approval of, but I did want to include multiple items in here for discussion tonight. Upon further review, I do recommend probably a CUP rather than an IUP. The one difference between the two is IUPs, you can put time constraints on them. Right now I have duration of 5 years on there. I don't think, from what I've heard, crypto mining isn't as big a concern for that. But if, say, an AI center or a cloud storage center is looking to move in, I think that might be a hindrance from an investment standpoint. So I'm more than likely going to be recommending a CUP. And with that, what you can do is a lot of these things that we have in the ordinance can be also then conditioned as part of the CUP, which if anything's in violation, the CUP could then be revoked on the land use permit. So with that, staff does recommend that we allow representatives. I think that we have 3 of them. Some of the neighboring property owners are here. We have somebody from Just for Crypto and somebody from Block Metrics, I believe, is online. I think it might be good to hear kind of their thoughts, and then Planning Commission and staff can go through each one of these other line items and have discussion, and then that way you kind of heard what the thoughts of the public are as well. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair, and I don't know if you have any questions prior to doing that.
Questions for staff?
Just a quick question.
Yes, Mr. Gorham.
I think words matter. We keep kind of calling it crypto and then data. Can we just call this as a data center issues, and with the notion that crypto is part of that? I know I'm just playing with semantics here, but I think we really want to be addressing the larger issue.
Yep, we can start calling it data center.
That would just be my only little 2 cents worth.
Perfect. And to be clear, this is not a public hearing, but we are interested in gathering as much information as we can to be able to then take this back and have staff craft something that then would be more formally introduced as an ordinance proposal. So just to be clear about expectations tonight, if we hear if you have similar thoughts that have already been expressed, in the interest of time, I would appreciate it if you would only bring forward the comments that haven't already been made this evening. And so with that, if there are no further questions from the commission or questions to staff, I would, at this point, open the floor and ask folks if they're interested in commenting to please come forward to the podium, state your name, your address, and direct your comments to the chair. Is there anyone that would like to speak to us on this particular ordinance topic? Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Brett Mathiasen. I work at Just for Crypto, 1640 Kitty Hawk. I think you guys are doing a great job in protecting residents for sound. I just want to make you think about applying in your ordinance stipulations that businesses, or specifically a data center, is required to, on a yearly basis, do sound studies and submit that into the city. I think that seems to be a little bit discriminatory against the business itself, and not holding the same standards to other businesses in regards to sound. I totally want you to protect the residents of sound, and we do tend to abide by all MPCA guidelines for sound, but taking those extra steps and requiring us to do sound studies, I think that might be a little discriminatory against this particular type of business. So keep that into consideration.
Thank you. So Brent, all uses under this, treat them all the same is really what I'm hearing in regards to the noise standards and
I would say all industry in town treat the
all
same
industry
sound
beyond
standards.
the
Yes.
data center cap.
If you have a loud construction company,
Thank you.
make sure that they're held to the same sound standards as a data center. Don't be discriminatory against one versus another.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone else that would care to speak to the commission on this particular topic on the data center ordinance?
I'm Megan Bach. I am at 11633 Oak Ridge Road. I had sent an email in that kind of stated a whole bunch of thoughts and requests, so I'm sure you guys have read that. Just want to make sure that you take into consideration those that are going to be impacted on a 24/7 basis that live around. We've got a lot of residents that have health issues and want to make sure they're protected, as well as any expansion to the city, since it is close to that area as well. So, thank you.
And you had introduced a note on the there were some missing land uses that you were seeing in there. Is that as far as,
Yeah, it
Addressing.
sounds like James maybe addressed that already.
And I can address that during the meeting as well. We'll kind of go through some of the questions that were brought up in the email as well.
thank you. Online, do we have a representative there that would like to add some comments or share some perspectives or input as we begin crafting an ordinance on data centers? If so, do we?
Hello, everyone. I don't know.
There you go. Go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Excellent. My name is Ro Shirole with Block Metrics, 1911 TC. We are in the process of starting construction and going through the approval process for a data center at that address. Just to add to some of the points that were presented already, a conditional use permit certainly makes sense and is validated, but just wanted to add the economic aspect of it. From an investor perspective, the ROI on these data centers tends to be longer than 5 years, and so an interim use permit may preclude investment into data centers in Brainerd if there's a potential risk of that use being withheld, after a 5-year period. Now, that being said, I certainly support. All businesses should be held to the same standard from a noise perspective and wanting to be a good contributor to the community. And maintaining those, staying within the noise standards for MPCA, and that should be a very strict guideline. But I'm a big proponent of a CUP versus an IUP for those reasons.
All right, thank you, Ro. Any other perspectives you would like to deliver to us? Or is that your extent of your comments at the moment?
That extends my comments for now. Would love to certainly entertain additional comments as we go through the process here. But thank you for your time and your efforts on this matter.
Thank you, and hang out as we have our discussion. All right. Anyone else care to testify or provide input on this topic? All righty. I think I'll pull it back to the commission for discussion, and we may reach out for additional clarification from those that have provided input. So thoughts from the commission here, and welcome, James.
Commissioner James Nordenau, present. Thank you.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you. Director Kronvik.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I'm kind of thinking is maybe we go through each one of these sections. I'll introduce each one of these sections, give it maybe my staff opinion on it, and then turn it over to the commission, and you guys can discuss or ask any questions from there.
Sounds good. Thank you.
So the first one is the definition, data center, a facility or portion of a facility housing networked computer systems and telecommunications equipment used for remote storage, processing, and distribution of data. Data centers include commercial crypto mining facilities, AI centers, cloud storage, and other similar uses. The first part was pulled, I think, from another part of code that I took a look at, and then I did want to kind of clarify everything that was included in it as well. So I wanted to see if there's any thoughts or concerns from the commission on the definition.
Feedback for staff.
Mr. Chair? I think we've covered everything except that technology that's going to show up in about a year that we're not even, we have no clue about. But otherwise, I think it's pretty good, but it's coming.
So that is an and et cetera.
Yeah.
Okay.
We didn't see this coming when we did the comp plan, not at all.
Well, he does have the other similar uses, so that's
Yeah, that covers a lot.
the parking lot for new opportunity. Mr. Norwood.
So, Chair, the definition is broad enough, I believe, to be able to encompass an enormous amount of the marketplace and type of organization that would be utilizing this type of use. The only problem with that is within the broad situation. Currently, we are looking at potentially one of the more hot button issues of that type of use, in my opinion. And so pigeonholing ourselves into something that is going to be where we're trying to make sure that we're in one of the more hot button things and then ending up with something that covers such a grand area of land use type. And so the definition, and as Commissioner Gorman, one of these days. It's one of those, within the last 4 months, there has been significant technological breakthroughs that have happened that will dramatically change the subject that we're talking about within data hosting and or crypto mining and or. There is enormous change that has happened within the last 4 months. And so to say that how things are today are going to exist 2 years from now, it's really tough to say that I understand the reluctance to say that, you know, how things have happened within the last 5 years, but there's significant potential for significant change.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Gorham.
Mr. Norwood, are you getting around to quantum computing? Is that what you're getting after, or?
That is what I'm slightly alluding to. There is financial situations, but just with the introduction of what NVIDIA has proposed within the last 2 months, what Google has proposed with Willow within the last 2 weeks, there is significant change that is coming.
Are these changes in terms of technology or how they're going to apply the technology?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So if I can follow up with you, Mr. Norwood, as we step through these, and so you are aware of some evolving technology, I would appreciate you maybe flagging things where we may be short of being adaptable to that new technology, if I might use it that way, just to help us alert, or if everything we're looking at tonight is no good in 2 years, we'll have to come back and address it in 2 years. But that's, I think, the advantage of a broad definition is to maybe catch the growth as long as we're dealing with the concerns. So maybe if you see things as we move through, if you could kind of raise that point about how we may be falling short or we may be overbroad in our, I would respect your input on that. Other comments? With that, James, next topic.
Head to the next, please. So this was taken from another ordinance discussing kind of what's allowed for kind of primary use versus kind of an accessory use with data centers. So data centers are not permitted to operate in the city of Brainerd unless explicitly approved by an interim use permit. Again, staff is recommending conditional use permit for this one. And again, to kind of reiterate, what you can do with conditional use permits is everything that's in here that we're potentially putting in the allowed use section, anything could be extracted and actually put into the conditions as well. So if they're exceeding MPCA noise standards, we could condition into there that they have to do sound studies rather than just being in here. That way, if they're in violation of that, it's not just a citation or potentially looking down court action. There's rules in administration for actually revoking the permit. So that's how a conditional use permit could operate, to still revoke it if there are violations, rather than having to put a time period on it. I'll go through kind of the other parts as well. Again, if they're accessory to the primary use, they can occupy no more than 10% of a building footprint, are used to serve the enterprise functions of the on-site property owner, and are not used to lease data storage or processing services to third parties, and are not housed in a separate standalone structure on the parcel. So that'd be similar to, obviously, we've already made outdoor storage for data centers, not permissible, but it also kind of reiterates it here as well. So this would be, for instance, maybe CTC has some storage areas within their facility. It doesn't constitute more than 10% of it. It's for their own storage purposes. That would maybe be an accessory use that wouldn't have to go through this conditional use permit process. So that's where this language comes in here, and I'll turn it over to the Planning Commission for discussion. And then obviously one of the big discussions is conditional use permit rather over interim use permits, and what your guys' thoughts are on that.
Feedback for staff. Mr. Norwood.
Mr. Chair, I am going to be one of the strong ones that would be moving towards a conditional use permit versus an IUP, simply because of the limitation with a time period that creates the instability for any organization to invest that heavily into, and the ability to function. It would tie a property owner's hands significantly as to be able to use that property or that land within the mobility that they would need.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Question on the sound, since that's a big issue with here. So there are laws out there right now that you can't pass so many decibels on anybody that's doing stuff right now. Would that specifically, like the gentleman here said, it would be fair that it's on all companies and businesses. So it stands to reason it's already on every business if there's noise issues. Is that correct, or is?
There is, but the ramifications on how you could potentially correct the issue aren't the same as what you could potentially do with this one, if so chose by the Planning Commission, City Council.
So would it be placed on specific things going forward? So, you know, I know W.W. Thompson's down there. They're fairly noisy, or the metal place, both of them. So they're probably kind of grandfathered in, is what you're saying. But going forward, if another facility like that was made, they would have to meet these standards.
There would, and I'd have to look at the zoning code. There may be other allowed uses in the industrial section. Don't take me on word, but I believe I've seen it in there where it says it can't exceed MPCA noise pollution control standards. We've had that for other hazardous waste as well. So there may be some other ones in there. I can get that information for the next meeting when we review to see, you know, how many other uses might have that standard built into the allowed use as well for noise.
And we have received testimony in the past about the difference between industrial noise during the work week, during the day, and industrial noise 24/7. And so we have to be mindful of the noise standard as you apply it to one use as opposed to a different use. And so I think we'll want to think through that and make sure we reflect that. James, do you have?
Yeah, and I'll add to that. Certainly, you know, that is a big part of why these are looked at and why there's ordinances looked at for this. It does detail when you are doing calculations for the MPCA noise rules. It's called what is called as L10 and L50. So this would be an L50, which has a higher standard because it is running all the time. So it has a higher standard of how many decibels you can get to. It also looks at noise classification areas. Is this an industrial area? Is it next to residential? So those are figured in as well as nighttime and daytime. So there's a lot of things that are figured into these calculations to not exceed.
Right. So if we're gonna build a noise standard here, it's gonna have to think through all of that balance as we go forward.
Yeah, that's
So,
a good point.
okay, good. James, for the conditional use, so Mr. Norwood brought up the point of the vehicle might change in the process of doing the use. So if we've not had the forethought to capture a particular vehicle, does the conditional use allow that because it's being, it performs the same use. You know, I'm trying to get at here.
So if it's a similar use, that's again, we'll go back to it. Housing network computer systems and telecommunications equipment used for remote storage, processing, distribution. Even if it's something that we haven't seen yet, I think that would be looked at as similar uses that would have to then be a conditional use permit. Obviously, we can't think of everything. With this, before data centers were even around, we had manufacturing. That's how most cities looked at these data facilities, as just as manufacturing, essentially. So what we're proposing here is to extract it from that and create its own allowed use section. Again, if there's something that we don't see, technologically wise, 2 or 3 years from now that needs to be extracted from this ordinance to have its own separate use, that could be done as well.
So again, we're regulating the use and how you perform the use. We're not into the details of that unless we put something in here that maybe is an opener, if you would, of a conditional use permit to say we need to re-enter that because this is delivered in a different way. Would that be a way of saying it? So as we think about that, if we're trying to be, if we're trying to guess as best we can and leave ourselves open for the opportunity to come back and scrutinize something else, that the conditional use permit, if we don't address it in here in a way that allows us to reopen that, that new method can certainly go forward.
So, yeah, so it can be revisited.
Okay. If it's different and the same use.
Yep.
All right. And, Ms. Dingline?
James, so if we go from the interim use to the conditional use, I guess I haven't seen us, maybe I have, but I don't know if I've seen it, where we have put some ongoing requirement in. So I'm wondering if instead of doing an interim use permit that needs to get renewed every 5 years, do we require then some sort of ongoing reporting or something that makes them come back to us?
I'd have to look into state statute. I believe you can do that with conditional use permits where it kind of comes back for review, but it's not quite as the same as an interim use permit that has a specific expiration date.
And then I guess, let's say that they build it, they pass all the inspections, and then, 2 years later, I'm thinking this is not the way it's gonna go, but 2 years later, whatever is going, this wonderful technology is much, much louder and we get a complaint. At that point, how does that process work? Can you run us through that?
So, kind of gets to section C a little bit about how we go through the steps of looking at noise and sound engineers. So the first one is prior to approval, a noise study must be submitted by a third-party engineer demonstrating to the city that the operation of the data center will comply with MPCA noise rules. So that's the first one that we'd look at. In the email, they did bring up, and I think it is in the Arizona code, to do a baseline, so you know where the baseline is on there. And I think that might be a good thing to add on there, so we know where the baseline is. How is this going to affect, based on this new use going into there. So I think that's something that could probably be added. And then, in my opinion, once it's fully operational, you'd look at doing a sound study in that peak year and seeing if it did meet those same standards that we approved the conditional use permit at. So, I do think that is something we should probably have on here. Certainly data centers can have a little bit more effect on neighboring properties than maybe some other industrial uses. And those are, some of these things are maybe things we should consider on, extremely noisy industrial uses as well. I do, thinking that it was brought up by Brett from Just for Crypto about the annual review of it and having to do that every single year. I've been thinking through that, and is there a potential way to write into a condition that upon approval from City Council, we they have to then commission a sound study. So if we're hearing issues, city council members maybe go out there, staff takes a look at it and taking some decibel readings, and we have concerns, maybe then as a condition, we say that city council can force them to do a sound study in the future if there's issues. Certainly the one that is proposed in the industrial area is looking at pretty low numbers because they're looking at immersion technology. A lot of what's, just for crypto is interior. So anything interior doesn't seem to be as big of an issue, and that's what's going to be required going forward. The biggest issue is probably these outdoor ones, and that's where you see all these news articles that, these are ones that are really impacting the community. So I'm not sure if there should be an annual one or we figure out something that we can put into the conditions that would require them to do it upon city council approval.
And then I guess kind of going in the opposite direction. In 2 years, this technology is whisper quiet, and so if in 2 years we come back and we're like, well, I guess we don't need to do all those sound studies after all, and we take it out, how does that affect any conditional use permits that are issued in the meantime requiring those?
So that's where I'm looking at, maybe instead of having it in here as a requirement in the code, city council approves it as a condition that says, you're only going to be doing a sound study if city council says that you have to do a sound study because there's issues. So it wouldn't be actually in the rules here. So if we're having issues, but if there's no issues, and we're 50 decibels and there's no issues to surrounding properties at all, the annual review might be an overkill, but it is required by rules here. So there's really no way to get rid of that if we keep that in there.
So would they have to then apply for a new conditional use permit to get that requirement lifted? If we put the requirement in, they get a conditional use permit, technology does amazing, wonderful things, and they want to get rid of that particular condition, do they come back for a fresh conditional use?
They would have to come back, for a fresh condition. So say it wasn't in here, say city council, say it wasn't in here as a rule that they had to do something annually. City council could still say that you have to do it annually within the conditions. City council could also, make a motion that says, again, if there's issues and city council wants a sound study, you have 60 days to produce it. Those are options to put in there that wouldn't necessarily have to be in the rules and administration, because if it's in the rules and administration, essentially you have to do it. You'd have to apply for a variance not to do it, and there's really no practical difficulties to not do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Norwood.
To follow along with some of that line of thought is that when I'm speaking of the emerging technologies that are coming, it is that it will be significantly quieter, largely based upon the ability of what is the products and the efficiencies that they're coming with. Within that, the utilizing a third-party engineer as to establish what will a third party, I should back up just a little bit, a third party engineer that is not committed to one side or the other, that would be able to review the documents and be able to establish by the petitioner or the applicant that this is something that would be able to produce less than what the requirement would be it in a conditional use or be it in a state statute. Within that, there's some references as to other data host facilities that are elsewhere. One of the key elements and why Brainerd specifically, but Minnesota ends up being a lucrative spot is because of the colder climate and where we exist. There's a few specific things that when data hosting ends up looking, they're looking for reliable power. Thank you, BPU. At a great cost, again, thank you, BPU. And then climate, workforce, water accessibility. There's a number of specific elements that Minnesota plays enormously large at, and where the most amount of investment that we will start to see potentially is going to be our northern situations that have great data lines which Brainerd also, that's one of the areas that we're working on currently. But as we fix the latency that has ended up in Brainerd, but there's more and better technology that and infrastructure that's coming in to provide for that. Brainerd has a number of the boxes that ends up checking off, and that's we're kind of sitting on top of the copper or the iron or the gold, depending upon how you look at it. I would hate to see that we say no. That's maybe a bad example. But I would hate to see that we completely pass and push everything off when we're using examples from climate areas that they have to use a significant amount of fan and cooling power and energy in order to get the product that they're looking for, whereas we're in a completely different climate and we'll be able to do it significantly more efficiently. And new technology coming.
Thank you. Okay, with that, James, did you want to jump back to B for a minute, or do you have some follow-up questions?
I think once we're talking, or since we're talking about it right now, you know, does the commission want to see an annual? I think that's probably the big one to look at. Does the commission want to see an annual report required to be done within the allowed use section, or leave it up to potentially putting it in the conditions if felt necessary?
Sure,
Can we just run down the line? Go
Yeah,
ahead, Dave.
I would agree with the second one. I don't think it needs to be yearly. If there's an issue, I think you deal with it then.
Same.
Yes, same. There's definitely going to be opportunities within an industrial setting where it is not close enough or creating issues that it should not be a blanket requirement.
I agree. Upon request of city council is perfectly fine with me.
I can see it as a condition on the conditional use permit. I think I would like to see it maybe, like tapered off. So kind of like we did with the interim use permits for short-term rentals. So maybe they do one before they get going, one when they start up, and, 1 year after that. And then, some sort of, so that we get at least that kind of baseline. And then, whether it's every 3 years after that, I mean, that'd be a condition that comes up at the time. But just what I would be looking for in something like that.
So a proof of performance,
Yeah.
in a way, and after you've established
That you're competent to run this thing.
then the frequency
Yeah.
that we ask you to come back and prove that you're still performing. Does that seem reasonable? Is that body language maybe makes sense here? Yes and no. So,
And
go ahead, Mr.
yeah, and I can always put it in there. This isn't
look
going to be
at
the
it.
end of the discussion. This is a very preliminary part of the discussion, so we can always take things out at the next meeting as well.
Brett, do you want to come forward, maybe offer, you've got a perspective on this topic?
I do.
Let's hear it.
Tiffany, you brought up a good thing. I just want to just rebut that a little bit. When you put in a large data center, first year noise studies may not be applicable because it could be years for them to fill up. So doing one in the first year and then again at the second and then having none 10 years later might be their peak time. So it might be best to consider when issues do arise to address them then.
Thank you.
James, did you have a question?
Would you consider the potential for noise to be directly correlated to the amount of energy being consumed?
Yes and no. It depends upon the type of technology that's in the data center.
Would it be remiss to say that when there is more energy being used and during those peak and utilizing the utility track record of those peaks and valleys as to being a determinant factor for when the tests and evaluations should occur for sound?
I would say yes. If you see the peaks of electricity, you probably would see your peaks of sound. Again, it does vary summer to winter.
Yeah.
In wintertime, cooling technology doesn't have to run as hard. Fans aren't as loud. So you could see a high peak in energy use or even higher because everything's running cooler, but the cooling systems aren't running as fast and as loud. So it does vary upon season.
Thank you. Block metrics. Ro, do you have any guidance or input on this?
No, I agree. It's noise is certainly a tricky thing to navigate around, and to Mr. Norwood's point, the technology is evolving lightning fast. We're deploying immersion technology for cooling at all of our sites globally, and immersion technology uses immerses the computing equipment into fluid, so it really makes things pretty quiet. What does the only parts that really generate any noise are the dry coolers outside, which are similar to what would be on top of a grocery store for radiators for coolers in a grocery store. So the point was raised that during warmer months, coolers are typically working harder, so that's when you may notice some noise. But then, depending on what cooling technology you're using, that's what will drive how much noise there really is. So our engineering is around at peak temperatures, peak ambient temperatures outside. That's really what we're modeling things after to be within MPCA guidelines, and then on top of that, we're putting a building around those cooling units to buffer that sound even further. So what would normally be just normal conversation level sound will be mitigated even further. So our goal is to never have anybody have an issue with sound around our data centers, but technology can continue to improve. But I do think it's interesting that under this we have an industry that's kind of being separated out, where there could be a XYZ manufacturing company right next door to us that could be generating a significant amount of sound, more than 50% of the time, and have a different set of rules than we would, as just because we're a data center. Um, so just something to consider there.
Understood. Thank you, Ro. So, James, what I'm hearing is sort of maybe a ramping kind of a requirement. And I'm also hearing there's probably some consideration for how far out you go, as maybe something for you to think about as you redraft this.
Yep.
But I'm hearing that let's get a couple of tests at the beginning to just kind of verify maybe some of the models, and then as some dots out of ways to say, okay, as this thing has come to capacity or exceeded the planned capacity, how's it look now? Are we still within those noise guidelines? Is that fair? Okay. Yeah, Megan, do you want?
Hi, Sarah TC.
Yep.
Just wanted to mention, just kind of cliff notes it, like our goal is not to doing repeated sound studies when you're not causing an issue. Like, we don't want to add extra expense to somebody else. Our goal is we just want to protect ourselves. We don't want to end up being the next city of Glencoe, and Glencoe is in Minnesota. And I've spoke to a lot of those people, and we just don't want to end up there. We want to know if somebody isn't out of compliance with MPCA, then what? Because from what I understand there's no repercussion. They've been in a 4-year battle, and the residents are upset. We just don't want to end up there. And from what I understand, the MPCA is a guide unless you guys say it has to be enforced. And that's what we're asking for. And I get that. And how do you make that fair to somebody not making noise and somebody who is? And the difference also when you're comparing to other industrial uses, why we're not saying like data centers should have different rules, but they operate differently. So the difference of 24-hour sound versus intermittent sounds is two different things. And when those MPCA standards were written, did that include 24-hour sound? Those were not written to include 24-hour noise. Because not many, can you name another industrial that's making constant 24-hour sound? I think that's the big difference that we're looking to point out.
Great.
But we thank you for all this, too.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So, Mr. Peterson.
I have one more question, more for the data guys that are here now. I'm in building, and we use geothermal. I don't necessarily, but there are geothermal heating and cooling out there, self-enclosed loops that are in the ground, which is a constant 50 to 55 degrees. Are those employed at all in this industry? I'm assuming it would help more in the summer months when it's warm.
Yeah, not with us. It would be
If you, could you,
Sorry, Brett.
Brett, you could come up to the microphone, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, not in our industry, because those would be pretty substantial in-ground heat exchange systems, not like cooling or heating a facility. There's a significant amount of heat that is disseminated from these technology units, computer units. So not that I'm aware of that they've used it in geothermal areas, but we don't, and I have not seen one.
So in your opinion, it wouldn't make much of a difference to cool these? Well, I understand it's got to cool things down. Sure works in the rest of.
I would think it would make a difference. I just don't, the size of that unit maybe put it out of,
Well, I guess my point would be put it in a constant loop. All you got is a pump. You're just spinning around 20 feet below you or 10 feet below you underneath your building, and you're just going in circles with this water that's going
correct.
over your oil,
You know,
or
why
around
do
your
they-
oil immersion.
Why do the grocery stores not do it and stuff? It just might be just completely cost prohibitive to do that.
And there may be standards as well, as far as how
Correct.
much heat you're dumping into the groundwater.
Could be.
or ground, so.
I do not know. I can't speak to that, so.
But it would be industry's challenge to meet the noise requirement if we were to develop a standard. And so I would think that they would do the full exploration of options and come forward with some sort of a technology solution that meets the noise standard that we put in place and can monitor through periodic reporting back to the city, in effect, to say that you are or are not. And so there's no doubt a broad spectrum of other ways of being able to cool your stuff. And so we would leave that, I think, to you to come up with what's most cost effective or makes the most sense for your application. And you meet that performance standard for noise.
Correct, yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
If I may,
Yes,
Mr.
Rob.
Peterson, you raise a great point. Geothermal is amazing technology, but this going straight into the ground in a loop, we can't cool the fluid fast enough for that loop because there's so many computing devices. So if there were, say, a neighboring body of water, we could do a loop through the body of water. We would be able to cool that fluid faster in order to keep up with the volume of fluid going through the computing devices. So that it certainly could be a possibility, but it's one of those things where you have to have the right site and the right spot with the right body of water next to you. And obviously in Minnesota, we have freeze thaw aspects and things like that can be additional challenges. Where we are seeing geothermal, and I'm working on some pilot projects right now in the southern part of the U.S. where we're repurposing retired oil wells or orphaned oil wells to generate power through geothermal means from those wells. It's not really used for cooling mechanisms necessarily, but definitely leveraging geothermal technologies. And our hopes is that the research from those studies will help to further geothermal throughout the data center industry. You've probably seen Google has invested over $1 billion in geothermal power generation out west. we're working on that as well. But there are some ways that geothermal can be used for cooling of these devices, depending on what cooling technology you use. It's just hard to cool it at the same volume without using a body of water.
Thank you, Ron. So, James, item C, do you have the guidance?
think I have clear enough guidelines for that.
Draft the commission's perspective?
Yep.
Great. Where would you like to go next?
So we can go back to B, location. So this is one I thought of quite extensively. So I'll read what is in here. No data center may be located within 500 feet of any dwelling unit or property zoned GL, CN1, CN2, TN1, TN2 as measured in a straight line without regard to intervening structures or objects from the data center site footprint or outdoor mechanical equipment. So with this one, there was another ordinance that was sent out from Missoula, Montana, very kind of similar to what's in there, except with that one, if you're within that zone, it would then require a special use permit, which is similar to a conditional use permit. What we're proposing here is a blanket conditional use permit, regardless of how close you are to the data center. So that's something to consider there, that we do have a blanket conditional use permit on here where we are reviewing and can put conditions on sound levels. Again, I'm not sure if this is too restrictive if you're creating a data center that has immersion technology and really isn't maybe going to have an impact to neighboring properties. No matter what, it's a conditional use permit. Sound studies would have to be done. It could still, if there is potential impact to a neighboring property, it can still be denied by city council. So I'm not sure. This is one that I'd like the planning commission to debate. If it is a conditional use permit, do we need a restriction, I guess a restriction from dwelling units? Because certainly sound studies are going to be looked at in here, and we still have MPCA guidelines and additional other conditions. So I'll open it up for discussion.
So, James, this mentions 500 feet of any dwelling unit or property zoned. So, we're considering one or the other.
So one or the other, the way it's crafted right now, I did not include rural living in that within the city. Rural living can be vacant properties, can be wetland. So to be 500 feet from a wetland seems like it's extreme. So that's why those were left out, because they're large acreage lots and can be looked at as a case-by-case basis with a conditional use permit.
But 500 feet from a dwelling unit on an RL, 1 or 2, would be consistent with sort of the intent of this.
It would, yeah. So if the RL had a housing unit on there, you would have to still then be 500 feet with this ordinance. So again, I'm not sure if that's too extreme. I believe there's an ordinance that did have a distance like that requirement no matter what. The Missoula, Montana was different than ours. I believe it would be permitted, and a special use permit would be required if you're within that 500 feet. So, I think there's some discussion to be had on this one. If we have a blanket conditional use permit, is this necessary? Because again, if somebody's proposing a data center that will have no impact or not really any other additional sounds than any other industrial property would have, they would not be able to operate here no matter what, because they're really not meeting the requirements for a variance. Does that make sense?
You could put, if we wanted to stay with this element, you could simply just reiterate, you could do the 500 feet from any dwelling unit or property zoned on the 5 zoning districts that you've listed, or within 500 feet of any dwelling unit on a RL1, RL2, as a way of sort of capturing without necessarily then making it 500 feet away from any, vacant pasture land parcel or anything like that, that you're referencing it back to a dwelling for those other 2 zoning districts.
And I think it probably is already worded that way, to where, you know, if it's RL, if it's a county property, you have to be 500 feet away from that dwelling unit.
Okay.
So I think the ordinance already states that. You know, again, the question is, you know, we don't have the standard for other industrial properties. You know, do we apply this standard to it, or do we look at it as a case by case, basis with the conditional use permit?
Okay. Other comments or feedback to staff?
Well, I think, I kind of like it the way it is. Also applying that 500, not just to our rural living, but if you've got something in the, I mean, we've got those few random little industrial properties that are right in the middle of a neighborhood, where I wouldn't want that, even though it's not actually a rural living, but I wouldn't want it going in there and something being noisy. So I kind of like that idea, and I like the idea of having it in here because I want to be upfront with anybody who's thinking about putting something into Brainerd, like right from the beginning. Don't be thinking you're going to put it in one of those. There's like, you know the ones I'm talking about, right, James?
For which ones?
The two little industrial, like it's 2 or 3 lots in the middle of a neighborhood. The old industrial park.
We ended up not including that as industrial.
Oh, they're
it's
not
an overlay district.
Right, okay. But like, you still get my idea, right?
Yep.
So I guess that, I think it's important for us to be upfront with them and where we've got places where we don't want them to go.
Thank you, Tiffany. Dave? Justin?
I'll take a step. So as far as the 500 foot and the intent, I do fully support and believe that it is for the protection of the individuals that are residing and living near or in grave proximity to that type of use. Within that, the 500 feet of a zoned property versus 500 feet of a dwelling unit can be dramatically different, especially when we're beginning to talk about R1 and RL1, RL2. Those, you know, the dwelling unit could be, well over 1,200 feet away, but the property line is immediately abutting. And that can create, a difference as to how and what we end up doing with that property. We do have, and within manufacturing and within city development, correct me if I'm wrong, but we oftentimes will end up putting housing near our industrial areas for the feasibility of having a quality workforce within close proximity of their employment. We see it in our neighboring city. We don't have a ton of it immediately within our proper, but it does happen, and it is something that is sometimes encouraged within city development. So to immediately say that based upon the zoning use, immediately to push that, the sound is by far and away the most important subject matter of this situation, as to the fact that that will be the thing that is the most hazardous within that type of use. Within data centers, noise is the problem. Some might argue the electricity, but within Glencoe, specifically being cited before, consistent meterings of 80 to 85 decibels is extremely troublesome and extremely difficult as for anything to be permitted. There are ways to end up mitigating and making sure that any investor and any company that is looking at coming to Brainerd, that we make sure that that won't be experienced. So what I'm saying is that I don't believe that 500 feet may be the best solution as to mitigate.
Thank you. Well,
Mr. Chair?
yes, thank you, Justin.
James, how far out from the property are these noise studies going to be done? Can we, I mean, because 500 feet, that's 2 city blocks, just about. That does seem like quite far. So how far away from the building are these noise studies going to be done where we can know what the noise level is going to be?
So you have different levels within your every time you double your distance, you kind of create a new zone. So certainly we could kind of look through it, zone by zone and do that study. You could look at certainly sensitive areas, which are people's properties, places that maybe have higher residential areas, businesses that may be complaining. So you'd look at sensitive areas to conduct the noise studies.
So, you want to take a bite of this? Ah, come on, Dave.
Not right up my alley, but
It's not your swim lane, huh?
Mr. Norwood has a much better handle on this.
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
So I guess there's a split here, James, as to whether to call out the location or just have it embedded that it's a byproduct of just the noise study, right? I mean, that's kind of, I think, what we're saying, and some of us like to call it out specifically that brings it to the point of why we're asking about noise and proximity, and if you cite these properly, you're probably, with consideration for dwelling units, then you're less likely to probably be having future conflicts. So can you maybe just take that feedback and package it and give us a blush, maybe your technical skills on how to maybe.
Maybe I can provide a couple options.
Yeah.
For the code there. Obviously we're just introducing the topic, and Planning Commission can, step back and think about it for a month, and I think this is a big one. Do we want to have a specific location of that 500 feet? Do we want it to look at it as an individual basis where we can put conditions onto it? So I think there's a lot to consider here. Yeah. And I'll come up with maybe some options for this one based on some of the feedback tonight. And again, this was one that I spent a lot of time really trying to consider and figure out what's best. And
Right.
we're just beginning discussions here, so.
Yeah, just help us, round this up and what or what thoughts come to you afterwards, and play it back to us in a new synthesis in January or so. Anything else on location, folks? All right, where do you want to go take us next?
So we can head to hazardous waste. So prior to approval, the developer shall submit a hazardous waste plan for review by the Community Development Department, Public Works, Public Utilities, and Fire Department. So we would take, typically all these departments would review a land use permit of this nature, but specifically we can ask them for a hazardous waste plan. I think we could maybe probably expand into requiring to abide by MPCA regulations on disposal. That could probably be added to this part of it here. And again, that could be then put into a condition that they have to, abide by their, what they had submitted for their hazardous waste plan, and has to meet MPCA standards. So that's right into a condition. So if there was a violation, again, that could then be revoked if there's some major violation there. There really isn't a great way from a staff perspective to continually monitor something like that. Certainly we've had a few times where people have reported things within our industrial park that then we have to follow up on. We contact the MPCA on that, and they'll go out to the site and take a look. We'll take a look. Our fire marshal might take a look, and then we'd address it from there. Again, if it was in the condition, then it could possibly be revoked if there was an issue. But you look at all the other industrial properties. I don't think this, what's used for the oil there is any more, probably dangerous than some of the things that are used for chrome plating, things that are, when we took a tour of Lexington manufacturing, there's multiple chemicals in that facility as well. We're not, inspecting that on a regular basis for their disposal systems. So that's how I would probably approach that one. And I can answer any questions.
Questions of staff? Thoughts on this standard?
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a standard that I don't believe that needs a whole lot of adjustment from what is actually intended and written within what we see printed. As far as requiring a petitioner or applicant to provide a hazardous waste plan, it should be, we can't just throw our desktops into our local home dumpster anymore. They kind of get pulled back out and set along the curb, and then the rest of the garbage goes away, and then I don't know if anybody else has experienced that. I've never. Anyways, can't throw your TV away anymore. But that being said, is that there is hazardous waste protocol that should be abided by, and especially in a large format such as this type, it should be adhered to, so that way for the guarantee of all public.
Thank you. Other comments? James, do you feel confident or competent in reviewing a hazardous waste plan? It's coming to you, right, or your staff?
Yeah, I would probably do an initial review on it, but again, our public works department, our public utilities, and fire department are going to be more knowledgeable than I am on that, so that's why those would be included as well.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, if we're asking to submit something, but we're not skilled in interpreting it or applying that information, you know, do we simply defer to the regulatory agency, right, the MPCA standards piece, and just say, you know, show me not the plan, show me the proof that you've got something, you've got a relationship already with the Pollution Control Agency.
Yep.
So that you're not collecting a document and going, so, okay. Other comments? All right. All right. I think that's it for that.
Yeah, so the next part is screening. This is somewhat redundant. I think it's good to put in here because we do have that in other parts of the code. Mechanical equipment is already required to be fully screened from rights of ways. I think the one thing that this one does add is that it has to be not in front of the building. So I think you have to back up generators, that type of thing, that have to be pulled out from, or air coolers, again, couldn't be in front of the building. So, but our current code already does require mechanical screening, so this is in line with it and adds just a little bit more to it.
Any comments from the commission? Looks good.
And then the last part, duration. Based on our conversation, probably take this part out. Maybe we add a duration to review period. That might be, I guess, the change in there. So I'll work on that part. But as it's crafted right now, probably isn't applicable because it does seem like we're going down the route of a conditional use permit. Again, yeah, this might be, you know, maybe a review period part if we do add anything to duration to conditional use permits.
Any objections to that? Good. All right. All right, where to from here?
Yeah, and we'll just go through maybe a couple items that were brought up in the email as well for discussion. I'm going to go to that here. Again, there was some concern about hazardous waste disposal. I think if that was put in the allowed use section, but then also put into the conditions, that's a way that if they are in violation of it, it could potentially be revoked. So I think that's a way to help ease the concerns about hazardous waste disposal. One of the other questions that were brought up in the email is potentially notifying residents within a half-a-mile radius of the parcel, including affiliated homeowners associations. It was in the Arizona code. Of it right now, our requirement is to notify within 350 feet. Certainly these would be a lot of letters generated. So this is something that have the planning commission discuss here to see if that is something that they would want to include in here. You know, we obviously don't have the same standard for other potential high use industrial uses. One thing that we could do with short-term rentals, we do have it on the website where anybody can access who that property owner is or the property manager, and they can contact them at any time. So it's found right on our city website and easier to access than trying to ask staff. It could be after hours. So there could be a potential that we create a spot on our website that would require some notification information on there.
Comments or reflections on that?
I like that.
So the proposal or the suggestion made by the comment received in email was a half-mile radius. If we were to use, just on the front end, if we were to use since we're talking about 500 feet for a dwelling location kind of a thing, if we were to use that number, it's 50% larger radius than what you're doing right now. But that could be another way of handling that as well. And then the online option to be able to register a complaint or those sorts of things. But to give people that initial notice, perhaps.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is, I can maybe craft it to be 500 feet if we go with the distance that we're looking at potentially for the location.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Norwood.
I'll briefly comment. So accountability for me is one of the greatest assets that we have, because we all are accountable to each other, especially when we are living in village and community and those kinds of things. And so notification and letting everybody know what exactly it is that our intent is. Sometimes it strikes fear, sometimes it strikes panic, but at the same time, information is the greatest way to overcome that. And I strongly believe that informing us as to all the things that we are all going to do and accountability within it is the best way forward.
Thank you. Yes, Justin.
I like the idea of the neighborhood meetings in the Arizona ordinance, just because that puts the onus on the applicant to allay the residents' concerns about noise. That's what I see. In my opinion, it's more on the applicant to say, hey, this is what we're doing. This is the noise we're going to create. This is how we're mitigating it. And have someone there, like this ordinance says, with decision-making power, so they can take concerns and put that back into the plan. And then come back at a second meeting and say, this is what we changed because of your feedback.
Thank you. Is that going to work for you to be able?
Yeah, so maybe we provide a couple options for that one.
Okay. Okay. All right. Where shall we go next?
So the other one, let's see. Per the document from Arizona, we request the following guideline: the data center must be designed and built to incorporate sound mitigation methods sufficient to prevent the sound levels emanating from the data center, as determined by a third-party acoustic engineer, from exceeding the ambient noise levels that were observed in the baseline study. Design specifications for such sound mitigation must be approved by the city before building permit approval. So wondering if, does this need to be in the allowed use section? Certainly we have MPCA noise standards. Are we going to require sound mitigation methods, and what does that look like? I'm not sure if that's just something that we review as part of the sound levels. They'd explain what they're doing with the facility, or are we going to require sound mitigation, and I guess what does that look like? It's a little bit ambiguous, but I'll take some feedback from the commission on this one.
Jared?
Guidance, yes.
Do have a
Dave?
comment there, and that's gonna fall back to these guys. There are many ways to stop sound in medications, just many, many ways. And I don't know if I'm assuming it's being incorporated down into their things. So they should be able to control it almost down to nothing if they really wanted to. Cost money, of course, to do that. But I think that would be the biggest one for me, because that's the complaints we're hearing from everyone, is sound. So I think if they get it on from the beginning, shouldn't be much of an issue as time goes on, if it's taken care of from day one. So this would probably be the most important one, in my mind.
Thank you, Dave. Other comments?
As
Yes, Mr. Norwood.
Mr. Chair, so as to establishing what that absolute maximum would be to be enforced, it is a very tricky subject, and as to who measures and meters and quantifies that is also a very tricky subject. Long-term noise exposure is definitely what we are trying to mitigate and overcome. As to the investment to what's noisy to me versus what's noisy to my father is a dramatic difference. Sometimes what I consider to be peaceful, great music is noise to him. And so within white noise and those kinds of things, as to the decibel level and those kinds of things, again, 80 decibels consistently going 100% of the time, 24/7, is extremely troublesome. And I can understand that as being a situation. As to how to mitigate it and best conform beyond the property, those kinds of things, and who's going to be looking at that, taking engineering, a third-party engineering firm to quantify and look at what would be produced. Most of the products that are coming to market do have some form of data sheet that is specifying what noise that they produce, and then compounding that into the larger assembly to make it so that way you should be able to compute it. It's possible to do, but the hard part will be measuring and making sure that it's compliant. So, yeah, it's easy to put it in an engineering document. It's harder to say what it actually is. I think that there needs to be some investment as to what the absolute maximum would be allowable at a specific distance. 500 feet keeps on coming up. It's not necessarily the one that I would appreciate, but it's a metric.
Thank you, Mr. Norwood. So I think if you provide a sound standard, performance standard, and you run the analysis and you're radiating out in so much distance out from it, it hits the threshold, but it's off the property. You're proposing, it's the task of the applicant to then come back and say, I must apply a mitigation strategy because I'm not meeting the performance standard, right? So
That is exactly what I am saying,
Yeah.
because whether it be a cold storage facility or a data hosting facility, I'm indifferent to what they're doing inside their walls.
So if you're shooting straight up in the air, a 80 decibel, 24/7, 365, do we care? If it's contained within the property. There's going to be some scatter, so there's a height requirement. So it starts to get kind of complex when you say, if I put a wall up, and that contains it at 10 feet above ground level, does that matter if you're in the second floor building or not? So as we think about this, to me, the impetus is on the applicant to meet the performance standard. So some clarity as to how, height might be important in that standard that we need to specify to be able to say that if you're going to mitigate your noise by putting up a wall, then that has to be able to meet the standards up to a certain height or something like that, or if you've got some other way of achieving that. Mr. Norwood.
So, for instance, in Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin, the data farm that was built there, the applicant ended up building a 30-foot wall in order to mitigate the sound. That's really tall.
It's a prison, isn't it?
And so I'm not saying that that is a qualitative and what I would necessarily be interested in seeing as, my neighboring property. A 30-foot wall is, again, pretty tall. But it is what was applied in a neighboring state, in a neighboring city. There are, again, coming through with a specific metric and a specific standard as to what we are looking for as to the noise question. And again, whether it shouldn't matter what is happening inside the four walls. It shouldn't matter what is emanating outside of them. Similar to what we do with breweries.
James?
Yeah, and I guess the second part of this is mitigation methods sufficient to prevent the sound levels emanating from the data center from exceeding the ambient noise levels that were observed in the baseline study. So that's essentially, meaning that, this ordinance says you're not going to create any additional sound whatsoever. I think that might be, for an industrial zone, too high of a standard.
So basically, no net gain in ambient noise.
Certainly, when you're reviewing a sound engineer looking at it, you're looking at what the MPCA guidelines are. You're looking at how it affects neighboring properties. If they are closer to something, or there could be an effect, certainly those mitigation methods are going to have to be put in there in order to get something approved from the conditional use permit. It's not just a permitted use. So, again, being that it's an industrial park, to not exceed the ambient noise levels that were observed in the baseline study may be something that's too restrictive.
Comments on the no net gain, if you would?
Sorry. Anytime that you see development and growth, there's pros and cons to everything. And so anytime that you see, it's hard to say that I would end up putting it more back towards a percentage of the metric rather than just a no net gain. And the reason why is because anytime that you have development and growth, it ends up impacting and changing. The noise that, I forget what Crowing and Recycling is on. I want to say it's on Industrial Park Road. It's not TC Road quite there. But on that specific road, what we see today as far as the noise production versus what we saw 15 years ago is a dramatic difference. And it happened over a period of time due to the continued growth and expansion and development of that specific property. And that organization is an amazing, personal opinion, is an amazing organization as to how much and what they serve and the number of employees and families that they provide for. That being said, is that there is more noise that comes from them. There is more traffic on the road. There is more calls for service, be they medical or any emergent traffic that ends up occurring. So anytime that we have more development, more growth, there is going to be more things. And so it's hard to say that no net gain would be fair.
Other comments? Justin?
Yeah, just no net gain does seem a little hard to meet. The industrial park is where we're supposed to put the noisy, dirty stuff. So no net gain seems a little ridiculous to me.
Thank you. Yeah, it strikes me that this is an idea that's bigger than the ordinance piece we're nibbling here. And just overall, how do you manage, increasing noise as you have increasing development? And it would broadly apply. I mean, Mr. Norwood's point of traffic and all these other things that are directly related, but indirect noise contributors and things. It's bigger than the task today, so I don't know if it would benefit us to put that specifically in this piece, but we might put it on our wish list of topics that we've been managing to say, maybe we come back and visit noise more broadly. If anyone, Mr. Norwood.
And so then that is part of the reason why I do prefer the conditional use type mitigation as to that, is that you do have the ability to end up kind of steering and correcting away from those protected things that you want to ensure and make as far as the neighboring properties. Within the conditional use, you can say that you must have all traffic exit this direction. You must place within a conditional use, you can say that you must place all the equipment at this location within the property. And so it ends up highlighting and specifying within the location of wherever that might be within a conditional use. It's very much a relationship between the city and the applicant.
Thank you. James, you get direction on that to be able to craft something for us?
I think we should be good. I think that's, I guess, the last thing that I have. If the commission wants to bring up anything else to discuss, we certainly can.
Thank you. Other topics to consider? I'd like to introduce an energy-based performance standard, and I would call attention to the Missoula standard. This one is specific for crypto mining in the example, but I think it applies broadly to the data center regarding an offset of renewable energy is what the standard is in the Missoula example. They're saying that the operation shall be required to develop or purchase sufficient new renewable energy to offset 100% of the electricity consumed by the operation. And it goes on further. So I'd like to see an energy component and a performance standard here focusing on the renewables. These are highly energy consumptive uses here. And so I'd like to be able to see a way that this does not bind the hands of the city in meeting renewable energy targets. And we're well on our way with our infrastructure at BPU with the hydro plant and 2 solar operations and such, that we have a growing proportion of our current energy demand that is renewable energy. And I'd like to make sure that we protect that when a new use comes in that basically is asking for 25–30% of the existing power demand of the city, that our residents are basically invested in, and doesn't throw us back onto the market to try and be able to buy high-priced renewable credits and things like that. So thoughts on that? Go ahead, Mr. Norwood.
If nobody else. So I would suggest potentially, rather than doing solely just renewables, as to identifying energy purchases that are non-hydrocarbon-based produced energy. And the reason why I state that is that within renewables, it is very much of a focused and identifies currently where we are at versus where we are likely to end up in 10, 15 years. And so I would strongly advocate for still the mitigation and alleviation of utilization of hydrocarbon-based energy sources, and not saying specifically renewable energy. And so what I'm getting at is nuclear. Again, as technology is consistently moving forward, it is a very good likelihood that nuclear will end up making a significant comeback. And as to the issues that we are looking at specifically within hydrocarbon, that's one of the main areas as to why renewables are a passion. I shouldn't say a passion. They are a necessity.
Thank you. Other thoughts on an energy standard of some sorts?
I like where you're going with it, but I am concerned about I'm gonna call it the shelf life of that kind of a requirement. You know, if we are requiring that they reinvest in non-carbon energy sources, there's going to come a time where that's just where energy comes from, right? And how do we, I mean, maybe at that point we're just, adapting and changing the ordinance again if we get to that point. But I feel like there's going to come a time soonish when that reinvestment is going to be counterproductive in a way, because that's already going to be the standard.
So the risk is that you're putting a standard that is no longer relevant.
I think James can figure out how to work around that. He has an idea.
If you can kind of work with that. James, do you have?
So I can work on something for the ordinance. I'm glad Mike brought it up at this meeting. I think it begins the discussion on it. But I think you're really going to need a representative from Brainerd Public Utilities here at the next meeting to explain how the power is purchased, who it's purchased from, and to see if it's even feasible to make this requirement. Obviously, they're purchasing energy from AEP. AEP purchases the power from. So I'm not sure what their percentage of renewables versus non-renewables are, how much extra it would be. So I think there's a very large discussion to have here, and we need some insight from Brainerd Public Utilities on this.
Sure, if I may.
Yes,
I
please.
think, and to add to that list for BPU to come prepared for, I think there's a lot of room to invest in our energy infrastructure lines and poles, and I don't even know what all is involved in me being able to turn on the lights at home. But a lot of our infrastructure could use some work, and if there's some way that we could allow that as an option as well, I see that we are not going to run out of that to upgrade anytime soon.
So other thoughts on energy? So you've got. Wow. The echo chamber again. Do I sense someone wanting to make a comment? Ro, were you wanting to make a comment?
Yes, if I may.
Yes.
Just a couple things to consider for the future discussion. Number one, just keeping in mind that as a consumer of the power, it's coming from the grid, so we really don't have any control over what the source of that power generation is. And although we may, prefer some high percentage of renewable energy, we just don't have control over that as the consumer of that power. Number two, making it fair and equitable with other industries that are also consuming power, for instance, manufacturing facilities, et cetera. Singling out one specific industry for essentially a surcharge on top of their power, whether that's fair and equitable or not, just up for consideration. And then number three, renewable energy credits can be it's kind of a variable market, right, in terms of the cost basis. So when a data center company or when a technology company is looking to invest in Brainerd or any city for that matter, having a a more defined, cost basis is part of that calculation when it comes to identifying whether to invest in a particular site and in this particular community. And if renewable energy credits are a requirement, that can vary quite a bit. I remember a few years ago where renewable energy credits were, you know, point one cents a kilowatt hour, and then they jumped to almost a half a cent a kilowatt hour within about a year span. That can have a pretty big swing from an economics perspective. So, just 3 points to consider in the future discussions, not necessarily to dive into today or tonight as part of this discussion, but some points to consider to try and find a happy medium to accomplish the ultimate objectives.
Thank you, Ro. So, BPU, help us think about the energy game. As Ro's saying, the renewable energy market is variable, and that's the piece that's at the front of my mind, as we move together as a state of Minnesota and as a United States of America, moving towards this carbon-free energy future. If we're shifting the burden onto the residents of Brainerd to make up those renewable energy credits, they're the ones that are consuming or absorbing the variable costs, as opposed to the large energy consumers. And that's so we have to understand a little bit, I think, about what the expectations and the targets are for Minnesota and for the nation going forward. So we've got some 2040 mandates at the state level to hit for some of the power generation side of things, and at what point and what are the standards for the communities that have to then also meet targets. And we don't want to shift industrial charges over to residential ratepayers, right? I mean, I think if we were to query the citizens of Brainerd and say, would you be willing to take on a rate increase in your power demands so that we can bring in a large energy consuming data center type of use, I think the answer would probably be no. And so how do we protect the residents of this community as we entertain bringing this kind of energy consumptive use in? And so if you can bring not only BPU, but can you bring in either facts or professional and technical experts that can talk to us about what some of the future milestones are. That would help us, I think, address the energy piece here. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes perfect sense.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else that should go in to the soup here that James is going to cook up and serve back to us? We'll look to see a draft in the future. Do you think that's something we'll see in January, or you think more of like a February?
We'll be attempting for January. I'll certainly be able to write it. The energy component with Brainerd Public Utilities, I'm not sure, what their timeline looks like and what their schedule looks like for a turnaround. But I'll certainly be able to make edits to the land use side of things.
Great. Thank you. Anything else on that topic? Then I think we're going to public forum. Public forum is the time allocated for citizens to bring matters not on the agenda to the attention of the commission, and time limits may be imposed. So is there anyone here from the public that would like to address the commission at this time? And do we have anyone online, Sean? Thank you. I'll ask a second time. Anyone wish to address the commission? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to staff reports. Director Kromvik.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So just want to provide an update to Country Manor. So Country Manor, again, is the development project north of Northtown, senior living facility, 110 units of senior living, as well as a child care facility. They're getting very close to construction. They have asked the EDA for, well, the city council, the EDA is the one that first reviews it for a recommendation, for additional tax abatement on that property. So originally it was it was about $850,000, 10 years, 45% tax abatement. They've asked for 1.2 million up to 20 years at 65%. The EDA has reviewed it and recommended their most volatile years will be when they first open. So the EDA has recommended 100% tax abatement for the first 3 years. Still 1.2 is where it would max out, and then kind of be a sliding scale from there. So that'll most likely go to the city council on February 3rd. They are going to be having to reapply for a PUD amendment because there are some small modifications that they had to make for value engineering. So that'll be at the next planning commission meeting. Also wanted to make it aware that the City Council has approved staff to advertise for our 2024 SAHA Fund, State Affordable Housing Aid. There's $4,000 available from the city for, you do have to meet certain standards for AMI, how much you make, I guess, versus how much the rent is. So there are some standards with that, but there's $104,000 the city currently has this year for projects. The deadline for those applications for apartments or last year's award to Habitat is January 24th. I think that's the last thing I had, and I just want to thank Tiffany for all of her time on the Planning Commission. It's a lot to discuss and a lot of time involved and a lot of research that has to be done. And she's been a wonderful Planning Commission liaison to the City Council, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, James. Administrator Broyles, I am sorry for bypassing you. Do you have anything for tonight's comments? Thank you. Thank you. With that, we're on to commission member reports.
I have none, thank you.
Thank you. James?
Nothing to report, and thank you, Tiffany, for being a person that has pushed and helped and made me want to be a better community member. You have made Brainerd better.
Thank you. And Justin?
I'd just like to say I'm happy to be here. Look forward to working with everyone.
Excellent. Tiffany?
Well, I want to thank all of you and James. I've learned so much on the Planning Commission. I don't build houses. I don't mind crypto. I have relied a lot on fellow commission members to help me understand some of the more practical difficulties in some cases. Oddly enough, water goes downhill, I understand. So I just want to say I really appreciate all of you in helping me be as successful as I like to think I have been.
Thank you. And I've appreciated every member of this commission over the years, and I hope to be visiting with you again in January. And I will point out that groundwater can flow uphill, so we have learned greatly from you. Thing line. So with that, I think we're at the close here. I hope everyone has good holidays and safe, and look forward to seeing everyone in January. With that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, motion second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. We are done at 8:03. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, folks, for